Okay, in this tutorial, we'll finish drawing this ER diagram. Just to remind you where we left off in the previous tutorial, let's look at the Visio diagram. We had the three entities, customer, meter, and reading. And I showed you how to, through the previous two tutorials, I showed you how to draw the entities and the relationships with their cardinalities using Visio 2016. So what we are going to do now is finish off the rest of the CR diagram. So I will draw this part of the diagram somewhat quickly because they represent regular entities and relationships that we've already seen. When I get to rate, set, and rate, I will spend a little more time because this entity called rate is a weak entity, so I want to spend a little bit more time describing that to you. And this relationship, you can see it has a solid line. It's an identifying relationship between a strong and a weak entity, so I need to spend just a little bit more time on that. Okay, so let's get started. Yeah, again, let me clean up this diagram. The first new entity that I will introduce to the diagram is bill, and then I will introduce this relationship called include. So let's do that quickly. I'll go back to the diagram and I bring up this entity here. I double click the entity name and I type in bill. That's the name of the entity. You know how to change the font size and the boldface and all that. You would just hide and double click it and you would come over here. You can change it to boldface and increase the size of the font and so forth, just like in Word. Okay, so coming back to the remaining attributes, we have to specify the attributes for this entity called bill. So going back to our PowerPoint ER diagram, we have bill number, which is the identifier, and the attributes are bill date and bill start date. Okay, so an identifier is the primary key, so I double click on that attribute and I type in bill number. Okay, that's the primary key. And the other two attributes, so when I click on the attribute, make sure you have the gray box around it, otherwise the name will not change. So the second attribute, I'm going to name it as bill date. That's what was there in the PowerPoint slide, bill date. And the third attribute is bill start date. So let's do that. Again, I click on the third attribute, make sure the gray box is around it, and then I type in bill start date. So I have all the attributes in there. I'm just going to resize the entity a little bit because it's too wide. So I click somewhere inside the entity and that puts handles all around the box. So I just pick up this yellow colored handle and oops. And I just drag it down, oops, and I just make it a little skinnier. Okay, so let me position this entity now a little closer to reading because that's where it needs to be for the diagram, and I'll put in this includes relationship now. So I bring in the relationship connector. I connect one end to the entity reading. Make sure the glue point, that green little box, showed up. So I take the other end of the relationship and drag it out and make sure again the little connector box is connected, the glue point. So I glue the line, the relationship together. Let's see if I can align it a little bit. Just move it up. Yeah, okay, so the relationship, the line is aligned, it is straightened out. So I need to change this from a solid line to a dotted line. I right click on the relationship and I uncheck the set identifying parameter, so that gives it a regular relationship. I need to give the relationship a name. So again, I click on the relationship and now I double click on that button in the middle, that dot in the middle. So I put in the name, includes, that's the name of the relationship. So I'm gradually getting there. So you can see I have includes, I have the dotted line, which is the relationship, and now got to specify the cardinalities. The left side is minimum of 0 and a maximum of 1. On the right side, it's a minimum of 0 and a minimum of 1 and a maximum of many. Minimum and maximum cardinalities. Okay, so let's do that. I right click on relationship, and I have to use the set begin and the set end symbol. As I've told you several times, I can never keep it straight which one is the begin and which one is the end symbol, is left or right. So I will just try it. I know that one of the ends has to be, so going back to the diagram here, one of the ends has to be 0, 1. The other end has to be 1, many. Okay, so that's all I remember. So again, I right click on the relationship. I pick the begin symbol and I do 0, 1, 0 or 1. I pick this. Okay, so I lucked out. The end, the left side became 0, 1. You can see over here, that's what I need. So now I will pick the begin symbol and I'll make it 1 or more. Okay, so I made a mistake there. I need to correct it. Again, I right click on the relationship. The end symbol needs to be 0 or 1. Okay, sorry, the begin symbol. The begin symbol needs to be 0 or 1. So we have that on the left hand side. So the end symbol, which will be on the right hand side now, the end symbol I pick to be 1 or more. Okay, so there I have the cardinalities. Now make sure that they match what we had in the diagram. 0, 1 on the left side, 1, many on the right hand side. And I will just click and I will increase the size of those cardinalities just to make them a little more visible. And you know how to do that. It's the begin arrow size and the end arrow size. The begin arrow size, I make it extra large. End arrow size, I also make it extra large. And you can see that those symbols have increased in size. So just make it more visible. Okay, so I've done one part of it. I've finished this part. So employee and reading. So I have to put in the employee entity and connect it to reading. So let's do that. So I pick up the entity operator and drop it down here. Okay. I double click on the entity name and I type in employee. So I have my employee entity, and let's see what the attributes are. Emp number, emp name, emp title. Okay, so emp number is the primary key. I double click on this, is EMPNO. That's the primary key. And then we have, what's it, emp name and emp title. Okay, so the second attribute is emp name. And the third attribute, I double click on that, is emp title. Okay, so I have my employee entity. So I click anywhere inside the box and I get the handles around the entity. I pick up the sizing handle and I just slide leftwards until I can get it a little more skinny. Okay, so I have the employee entity. Let me move it up a little bit. And now I got to connect the employee entity to reading, because employees take readings. You can see that in the ER diagram. Employee here, they perform readings, and it's a one-to-many from employee to reading. So let's make that connection. So I pull the relationship here. So one employee, so I bring it. Here's the one employee, takes many readings. So I connected the glue point here to reading. So I have one employee takes many readings. Again, I have to right click on this relationship and change it to a dotted line by unchecking the set identifying parameter. And let's look at the cardinal. Oh, I need to give a name to this relationship. So I click on the relationship and then I double click on the relationship. And what's the name here? The name is performs. Okay, so I type in the name performs. And now let's check if the cardinalities. Here it says 1, 1 is minimum, maximum. Here it's 0, many. So let's see if it matches what we have in the diagram. Well, luckily it does. So it's 1, 1 and 0 many. So I don't need to change any of the cardinalities. They are as we need them. Okay, so this part of the diagram is done. Now I want to spend a little bit more time on this left hand side. So I will introduce an entity called rate set, and then that's a regular entity, a strong entity. I'll connect it to customer, and then we'll get to this weak entity. Okay, so let's see how I'm doing on time here. Oh, we have 10 minutes gone. All right, it's manageable. So I will introduce this entity called rate set. So I pull up this entity operator and I drop it in here. Do you see, as soon as I do that, the margins of that white sheet that we had are altered. It brings in a new page. It automatically adds a new page, and you can see this divider line for this from the one page to the next. So the page size will, the sheet will widen as you and lengthen as you add more entities. So the name of the entity was rate set. Let's go back and see what says. Rate set number. So the primary key is rate set number, and the other two attributes are rate set APPR date and rate set effective date. Okay, so I click on the second attribute, is rate APPR date. I think that's the next attribute. Sorry, it's rate APPR date, and then rate RS effective date. RS effective date. All right. It doesn't matter what the names of these attributes are. I may have mistyped one or two, but you get the idea that we are adding attributes to that entity. Again, I click somewhere inside the box. I pick up the yellow thing and I size handle, and I reduce this, make it skinnier, just to save real estate. And now I got to connect these two entities by a relationship. So the relationship is called assigned. It's a one-to-many relationship. Let's do that now. So I pick up the relationship operator and I drop it in here. So the one comes back here. I just connected it that way because if I go back to the diagram, the one is over here on the left hand side, the 0 many cardinalities on the right hand side. So I'm moving that one over to let's see if I can align. Okay, it's aligned. 0 too many. Oh, it's just the way, I think it's 0 many. Yes, okay, it's good. I didn't have to change anything. I just have to make this relationship dotted line. So I right click on it, uncheck the set identifying, and then I double click on the relationship and I give it a name. The name is assigned. You can see over here, that's the name of the relationship. So I type in assigned. All right, so let me right click on the relationship and just make it bigger. The begin arrow size, I want to make it large. So begin arrow size, let me make it extra large, and the end arrow size, let me also make it extra large. So there I have a little bit bigger symbols that it's easier to see. Okay, so rate set and bill have been set up. I've connected these two, and now I will connect. I'll create this weak entity called rate. Now the weak entity, you can see, has a special shape. It's got these cutouts in the corners. Unfortunately, Visio does not have any feature by which you can put these cutouts, but what you can do is make the entity look a little different from the regular entity. So the way I will draw it is I'll draw the entity with rounded corners, so it'll look something like this. It will not be the straight. it'll have rounded corners. Okay, so something visually to tell you that it is not a regular entity, and when you look at it, you will interpret it as a weak entity. Moreover, this relationship here will be with a solid line because it's an identifying relationship. Okay, so I'll introduce this new entity called rate. So here is my entity operator. I bring and drop it down here. I click on the entity name and I give it the name rate. The attributes are minimum usage, maximum usage, fixed amount. Okay, so what was the attribute here? So the identifier is minimum usage. Min usage is the identifier. So I click on this attribute next to primary key, which is the identifier. So I say min usage. That's the primary key. You can see over here min usage. The remaining two attributes are max usage and fixed amount. So I click on the second attribute, max usage, and then I click on attribute name is fixed usage. Okay, so those are the attributes. I think I got all of the fixed amount. I'm sorry, let me correct that. Fixed amount. Okay, so I click somewhere inside the entity. I grab a hold of the yellow size handle and I make it a little bit skinnier. Now I have to connect these two entities. I have to show you how to make the. All right, so I highlighted the entity and I told you I'm going to make the corners rounded. So do you see over here on the right hand side, when I click on the entity, the format shape, it's got rounding presets here. So let me pick this. You can pick some, however much rounding you want. So just as soon as I pick that, do you see the entity has become rounded on the corners? So it's just a visual indication to you that this is not just a regular entity, this is a weak entity. And now I will connect it to rate set, just like, let's go back to the entity relationship diagram. So you have the weak entity here, and I connected it to rate set using relationship contains. So let's do that now. So I'll bring up the relationship here. Let's see which side is one and which side is many. We have one on rate set and many on the rate side. One on the rate set and many on the rate side. So I will bring this down here, and this other end of the relationship, which has the one, I'll connect it to rate set, and there we have it. And this time I'm not going to convert it to a dotted line, because this is an identifying relationship, a relationship between a strong entity and a weak entity, but I'll just give it a name. So I double click on the relationship and the name is contains. So I type contains, and there we have the identifying relationship. And in fact, if you click on the relationship and then right click on this yellow button, you can see that this set identifying parameter has been checked off, and that's an indication that this is a connection between a strong entity, a regular entity, and a weak entity. So the last thing I will do, let's see how I'm doing on time here. It's 19 minutes. Okay, so we're plodding along, I guess. So let me just make these two endpoints a little bit bigger. So I click on the relationship, and on the right hand side, the begin arrow size, I make it extra large, and the end arrow size, I also make it extra large. Okay, so there you have the whole entity relationship diagram completed. Now you can obviously, if you reduce the zoom, you can see that this diagram now looks like the entity relationship diagram that we wanted to draw. Now I'm just going to add a couple of things to this ER diagram in Visio, just to show you some other things that you can do, which is not related to the model that you just saw. I just want to show you a few more features. So let me just zoom out. One thing I want to show you is that it is possible to have multiple relationship between two entities. So let's say, again, remember that what I'm about to draw here has no relationship to the model that you drew over, that we were drawing before. I'm just adding it to this diagram just to show you the features. So I have this entity. Let's say I have an entity called student. Okay, and I'll just put in some attributes. The primary key, let's say, is student number, and we have one other attribute is student name, and the last is student address. Okay, so let me size this. So here's student, and then I'll bring in another entity called faculty. I'll drop over here, give it the name faculty, and let's just create some arbitrary attributes. Let's say the primary key is faculty ID. The next attribute is faculty name, and the last attribute is faculty email address. Okay, it doesn't really matter what the attributes are, just we have two entities, student and faculty. So let me again resize this a little bit. Okay, so I'll just pull it apart a little bit. All right, so between student and faculty, one obvious relationship that you could have is faculty teaches student. Okay, so I will have a relationship. I bring it here, so I connect this. So we have one faculty. So let me uncheck it. So one faculty can teach many students. Okay, let me right click and increase the size of the endpoints. So begin arrow, jumbo. Okay, so we have, and we give a name to this relationship, teaches. Okay, so a faculty member teaches many students. One faculty member could teach at least 0 and at most many students, and a student is taught by at least one faculty, and actually the right hand side should be many also. So this is a many-to-many relationship. So let me just change that. I right click on it, and let's see, 0 or more. So end symbol, I'll change it to 0 or more. Okay, all right, so one faculty teaches at least 0 and at most many students. One student is taught by at least 0 and at most many faculty members, right? A student could have many teachers. So this is one relationship between faculty and student, but you could have another relationship between faculty and student, and that is advisors. Okay, so I'll bring up another relationship here. Okay, I'll connect this to faculty, and I'll connect the other end. Oops, here. So here's another relationship. No, I didn't do a good job of connecting it. Let me delete this and draw it again. I bring the relationship over, and I connect one end. I glue it to faculty. The other end I drag over and I glue it to student. Okay, so now I have the relationships between the two. Oh, doesn't did I do that? Doesn't look like I connected it properly. Let me try it again. So here's the relationship. Now bring it over. Okay, so let me see. I'm having difficulty positioning it properly. Okay, here we go. Just connected one end and I connect it to the other. All right, we finally have this here. So this relationship could be advisors. So let's give it a name. I double click on the relationship and I say advisors. That's the name of the relationship. And I will uncheck the identifying parameter so it becomes dotted. And let me align it. So, all right. So now do you see that okay, so let me increase the size of the end arrows. Medium, I'll make it extra large. Extra large. Okay, so one faculty member advises many students, but one student is usually advised by only one faculty member. Okay, so the reason I drew this particular diagram is just to show you the importance of having a name for every relationship. Since there can be two relationships or even more, in this case there are two relationships between the same two entities, student and faculty, it's absolutely important that you give a name to each relationship. And you can see here one relationship between student and faculty is many to many. The other relationship, namely advisors, between student and faculty is one to many. All right. So I've shown you some of the different features of Visio 2016 to enable you to draw entity relationship diagrams. The last feature I'm going to show you is again, I'm just doing this to show you a feature in case you need it. If it's a unary relationship, all the relationships that we have drawn so far are binary relationships. This one is going to be a unary, namely a relationship between an entity and itself. So in order to do that, I'm first going to add an attribute to this entity called employee. So I'll right click on employee title, I'll right click on this attribute called employee title. When I right click on it, do you see it says insert attribute after? I click on this and now I will just add an attribute called supervisor. Okay, so let me just widen this box a little bit. Supervisor. So a supervisor is also an employee. So the supervisor, what that attribute means is, given a particular employee number, who is the supervisor? Is the supervisor number. So there is a one-to-many relationship. So one employee may supervise many employees, but an employee can only have one supervisor. So there is a one-to-many relationship of employee to itself. That's a unary relationship. So how would I show that? I basically need to draw a line from entity to itself. So how would I draw that? I pick up this tool called the connector. Okay, I bring it down here and I connect it here, and then all right, so do you see it looks ugly at the moment, but now if I pull the endpoints out a little bit, let me pull these out a little bit. Do you see you have a one-to-many relationship from employee to itself? Okay, so one employee can supervise many different employees. So if you start from here, one employee, can supervise many different employees, but each employee is supervised by only one employee. So in order to finish this relationship, all I have to do is right click on it and uncheck the set identifying, so it becomes a dotted line. And if I double click on it, I will say is supervises. That's the name of the relationship. Okay, so one employee supervises many employees, and if you go in the reverse direction, an employee is supervised by exactly one employee. All right, so these are all the different features. The only thing that I could not show you in Visio 2016 is how to do super types and subtypes, which we studied in class conceptually. But that feature, the way to draw it, that feature used to be there in the older versions of Visio, like 2010, I think it was there. But in the newer versions of Visio, that feature is no longer available. So you will not be able to draw it using Visio and the crow's foot diagram option. Okay, all right, so this is all I had to cover in terms of how to use Visio as a tool to draw your entity relationship diagrams.